477's one-to-one. I'm so excited to have you today. We met, I guess, earlier this year in January, right, at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit. We're both jurors for the IDEA Awards, or I guess A stands for awards, but for the IDEAs. And I just had such a great time talking with you at that event, that 2 or 3 days, and then I ended up moving to Portland, and we ended up getting coffee, and so yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing I always love to ask people, I feel like designers are a little bit like superheroes in that we all have our own little origin story. You know, none of us, typically our parents didn't influence us to do this, so what got you into design? What was your origin story?
I guess having 4 brothers and a lot of broken car parts in the driveway all the time that were getting reassembled, and a general curiosity, I think, about how things worked. And that goes all the way from science and nature to mechanical things. So I think pretty early on I also felt I had to do something making-wise, so my hands were looking for ways to build things, or whether it was snow forts with my brother or building blocks, it was always something constructing around us. And I think that's what kick-started it.
Yeah, I feel like designers are, I remember my wife was going through some old papers and she found like a kindergarten report card, and it's always like the notes the teacher would leave, and they wrote that she was very industrious. And I always thought that term applied to most designers. Like, we're always just not doing something.
Yeah, I think it's a restless mind. And then when I discovered art in school, because industrial design wasn't taught in grade school, of course, so the minute I could make the clay ashtray or the handprint, there was something kind of visceral about the moment of making that I think stuck with me, and then all the way through until I got to college. So once I got on the track of industrial design, then the sky was the limit.
Do you think design could be taught at the grade school level?
I think it can be taught pretty early on. I taught at the Design and Architecture Senior High School in Miami, which was a magnet school for high schoolers, and I taught the 11th grade wheel, and the students were very quick to immerse themselves in design, and from not having done it before. So I think it can be taught early on. There are principles of design that are quite, I think, support learning in general and how we develop as human beings. So there's a lot of empirical data that comes from just making stuff and failing that I think is part of design.
Yeah, I think that kind of at its core, creative problem solving is the core skill that we need in work, right? Versus over rote memorization, right? And so design certainly teaches you that. What's the the short term for that school in Miami?
Dash,
yeah. I've worked with several industrial designers that went through there.
Yeah.
And they're just, they're exposed younger, so they're just better, right? Because they have more time in the seat, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it takes time to curate one's point of view, and then to develop just the skill sets, which is where we all start. It's the skill of how do you think about a problem, and then also how do you construct the problem, and then how do you begin to solve the problem, and then all the things that let you express that to somebody, whether it's sketching or making or imagining it somehow. So that's the students there were extraordinary, and also because you're teaching a lot of kids who are English as a second language, there's a communication that almost the language disappears because you're in the moment of creativity, and that blurs the lines of not being able to really fully communicate with somebody linguistically.
Yeah.
So it's a great school. I have strong fondness for it.
Last year, a couple of schools, one in San Diego, another one in LA, had me come in to do design workshops as part of their STEAM programs with third graders, and I was a little concerned. Like, third graders, I don't know if they're gonna get it as a concept. And what I found is that they're all designers. They got it. So I explained what I do, and I could tell they're like, yeah, I get it. You make, and so one of their projects was to design a chair, and they just kind of intrinsically got it. Like, oh, I'm gonna, we did user interviews where they had to like talk to like their mom or a family member, and get kind of like some parameters and some preferences, and then design a chair, and then basically pitch it back to that person, and they all just like took to it like it's what they were doing all the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel there's something about that young brain where it's almost like we're almost training design out of it, but it's kind of already there in a weird way.
Well, that happens. I think someone famously said children learn a lot of ways to ask questions when they're younger, and that does get stripped away somehow as we formalize our communications in education. So it's to stay curious in life, I think, is a great gift, and it makes you hungry about how to make things better for other people, and hopefully how to make just things better.
Yeah. So what was your journey from kind of learning about kind of being this kid making things, being industrious, to then you went to Pratt? Is that right?
I did. Yeah, I went to Pratt, and somewhere along the first year, you're in a foundation program where everybody's taking an equal array of the appetizers of what art and design schools could offer back then. So we were studying form and light and shadow and drawing, and we could take some electives. But my light and color teacher was married to an industrial designer who ran the graduate program at Pratt. And towards the end of the first semester, maybe, she said, you might want to walk over to the building that's catty corner to our studio and check out industrial design. And I put it off because I was focused on printmaking and potentially sculpture or other things that were calling to me. But the minute I walked into, I think it was the 4th floor of the building, and there was, this will really date me, but there was the video phone, and I think a motorcycle model, and a teapot, and the perpetual motion machines of, the balls that go down a raceway and click over and make sort of kinetic activities. And I saw all this stuff, and I thought, well, this is so cool. I didn't know people did this. I didn't know where it came from. And so as I began to think about it, I would go back to my class, and then eventually, as I had to pick my major, I applied to the school. And I think there were probably about 20 students in our program. I don't think that many graduated, but I absolutely blasted through it and had a blast. It was great.
Isn't it strange how, she didn't turn your head, right? Like, it's so many things in our lives come down to like one chance interaction with one person. And I mean, I remember when I was in school, in high school, I think it was in 9th grade, I was in math class. I'll never forget, Mrs. Jacobus was my geometry teacher, and I was in the back just drawing furiously, something, probably a robot or something, and I didn't hear Mrs. Jacobus kind of lecturing, and came up behind me, slammed her hand down on the table, and crumpled up the paper, and threw it in the trash, and said, "Come see me after class." And everybody, "Oh, you're in trouble." She basically came up after class, and she took the paper out and smoothed it out and wrote at the top, "Rhode Island School of Design." She's like, "My brother went here for architecture. You could get their it's before the internet." So she's like, "Go write to them and get their catalog." And that's where I went to school. So cool. I mean, like, she changed my life, right? And she could have just been annoyed and sent me to detention, right? But instead, she changed my life.
Yeah. Well, that's what good teachers do. Yeah. I always credit the teachers I've had that have been extraordinary guides in my life.
Yeah. So young Cia Mooney, coming out of Pratt, did you ever think that you would be chief design officer of a furniture company? Did you have a vision for yourself, or was it more of a path of discovery?
I think it was both. When I was at Pratt, I was lucky to get a summer internship at General Motors. It was part of their scholarship that they were doing back then. So there were about 8 of us from different schools around the country, and we spent a summer at the tech center. And I'd always had this passion for cars. Again, probably because my brothers always had these vehicles, and I loved to drive cars. So I thought I couldn't wait to get my license as a kid. And I think that experience showed me that there were two avenues in design that were influential in the corporate world, at least, and that was the designer who created the vision and the designer who led the team through the creation of sort of the allowing of the space for people to be creative. And then when we were presenting to leadership at GM, our summer projects, there were a whole host of people who came in, and it happened to be the summer that Bill Mitchell was retiring, so we had Corvettes strewn across the lawn of General Motors. We got to see these really amazing cars, and I was trying to put it all together. Where's the designer in all of this? And I saw them at all different levels of the company, and plus they were being treated somewhat in a godlike way because it was a very curated life for designers there. The grounds of the tech center were absolutely beautiful, and with Saarinen buildings.
I was going to say Saarinen, right?
Right, and Calder water sculptures and these beautiful vehicles laid out, and a lot of really beautiful studios with big glass doors, and the clay models would come in, and everything would be sculpted, and the designers would be there, and it was quite quiet and almost a religious experience in the way people just were kind of watching the line of the form as it was being manipulated, and studies were on the wall. So for me, it was just an eye-opener as to the breadth of where designers could play. I had no idea where my career would lead. I thought I'd always be running something, my own, or with a group of people. But I also had a great deal of wanderlust, and I knew I needed to go out and taste the world at large, and that's really where my career took me.
Yeah, I mean, you've had a lot of different experiences working for Steelcase, and then being head of the department at Oregon College of Arts and Crafts, and so going back and forth between industry and education. And was that a desire to seek out different kinds of experiences?
I think so. I think I was always looking for what would satisfy some sort of yearning in me to master something. And I kept thinking and looking at how other people were working in the world. So the education part of it just came from my mom was a teacher for a while, and she influenced a lot of my interest in just helping people. Both my parents were pretty socially active, so I thought that was a good thing to do. So I worked a lot with nonprofits and did a lot of museum exhibition design work early in my career, so children's museums and science museums. And then I kind of hit a wall, and I was burnt out, and I decided to go to graduate school. So I went over to Milan to shake my brain out and shake my bank account out, which was pretty
cheap city.
It was pretty challenging back then. But I wanted to also experience the scene in Milan, because it was much more of an epicenter than it is today. Now design is happening in 100% design shows are everywhere on the planet. But back then Milan was sort of the gravitational pull. And I'd seen a show in New York that Emilio Ambaz had put on about the new domestic landscape, and Italy was front and center in that. So you saw Sottsass's Valentine typewriter, and there was a Vespa, and there was a Richard Sapper computer, or a Aldo Rossi coffee pot, and everything was just the form, the colors, the sort of sensuality of it all was really intoxicating. And I couldn't go at that time. I needed to earn my keep, but eventually I was able to go, and then I worked I went back after graduate school and I worked for Aldo Cibic, who was one of the Memphis guys who started with Sotzes. And then I moved over to the Sotzes studio and worked under Marco Susani, who was the head of the ID department at the time. And so it was just sort of a dream fulfilled at that point to try my hand there.
I think I think it was 1996 maybe, I did a summer study abroad program in Milan in conjunction with Domus, and it was eye-opening, right? I mean, I was in undergrad, but you're coming at the time kind of pre-internet days, and so you're really only exposed to what's going on in your educational microcosm. And maybe you knew a few people at a few other schools, but then to go to Milan and to see these very different ways of thinking and designing, and that program was one of the best things about it. Was the first 2 weeks was just touring. So we went to Studio De Lucchi, we went to the Alessi factory, the Sagis factory, Bruno Mali factory. So you saw different designers working, and then you'd see the Bruno Mali factory and someone just picking up a shoe and just getting it perfect, right? And so very different than the production that you would see in the U.S. at the time, or that you see in Asia now. So I could imagine being over there for an extended period must have really shifted your perspective.
Well, it did. I had started with Domus. The program there was incredibly influential, and Bronzi was leading it, and every day you'd come into class and there would be somebody out of the history books teaching you, and I was always kind of gobsmacked that I could be so lucky to listen, even though it was hard to sometimes understand the theories of it all. When you're talking about Nietzsche and Kierkegaard in Italian, it's already hard to understand in English.
Right, yeah.
And then you have somebody like Bronzi leading the chorus, and it's, wow, it's pretty trippy. But I found it incredibly inspirational. And then Milan was a marvelous city for a young designer, because behind every door there was also these wonderful studios that had been there for a long time. And to see how people managed these small studios but put out either very prolific amount of work or very esteemed amount of work, it was really wonderful, and there was a great generosity. And I think it's post-war Italy and the creation of design and architecture and industry, fueled and fashion, all coming together to support one another, I think made it a very great experiment for design. And I don't know if it'll happen again like that, but it was certainly a very intense period for me to just swim in the pool at all.
Yeah, and I actually hope that for us both living in Portland, we've talked about the creative culture here, and I do get a little bit of that sense of fellowship in doing these interviews with other designers. Everybody's really open to sharing and helping each other, and I hope that we can. It's hard in a digital age, I think, to create that kind of geographic fellowship, but I hope we can get a little bit of it going. I do feel like there was such at that time period such passionate thought that went into these collectives in a way that produced manifestos and movements, and that's something I'm not really seeing today, where there's not like a school of thought outside of just what I would call kind of like stock minimalism, right? So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is? I mean, you'd think we're so exposed to everything. You would think, and our manufacturing techniques have gotten so advanced, you would think there'd be more room for these niche movements.
Well, I think you said one critical word: school. The education is really where a lot of these movements started. So whether it was in Florence or in London at the Architectural Association, it takes a group of people who are provoking one another and have provocative visions to question society and question their profession and question the process and the practice. Between Zaha Hadid and Rem Koolhaas and Daniel Libeskind and those folks who were at the Architectural Association, they were very radical in their thinking about breaking with Misesian tradition. And I think architects very often lead these movements because they're living this long lens of history. When we build, let us think we build forever, is a famous part of their phraseology. And for industrial designers, we're maybe more less time horizon focused than an architect. But I think there's something in architecture that has always called to me as a way of looking at the longer lens of history. But I think it takes a group of people who are comfortable being agitators and coming together just the right time. And it happens in literature, it happens maybe in other venues, but I don't know today if I could see where that's coming from. I don't know that I have a sense of a core group of people really changing. The movement doesn't seem to be as crystalline as it used to be.
That's interesting.
Though I think the environmental movement, I think the whole sort of, it's been going for a while, but the material changes. Industrial design is becoming more dabbling in scientific realms, algae in a petri dish and mushrooms ground up, and the sort of trying to make more with natural, getting closer to the natural world.
It's like mushroom-based leathers, and there's all these things that I feel like maybe we're just on the cusp of a lot of different things, whether it's materials or production techniques, designing things that couldn't be built any other way than printing them, for example. So maybe where we are maybe the tools will influence those ways of thinking. I don't know.
It could.
But hopefully we can at least have the environment where the fertile soil for these kinds of discussions can happen. I went to a lecture recently by Tony Belusky. His father is Pietro Belusky. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He designed St. Mary's Cathedral in San Francisco. That's that. If you're trying to, it's kind of on the edge of Pack Heights. You'd know it by seeing it. It looks like, basically it's like this really dramatic structure. It's all cast concrete. It looks like this, and from this is stained glass, and so from the air, stained glass looks like a cross.
Capiche. Yeah.
And it's very Saarinen-like. You go inside it, it's amazing. There's these crazy trusses that, and I would tell you, I got persons like that big. And so anyway, he was based in Portland for most of his career as an Italian immigrant who I forgot why he came here, but settled in Portland, and he designed the Portland Art Museum. And the famous story, the Portland Art Museum, I think, was his first big commission. And the famous story was he was nervous. It was his first big commission, so he sent all the drawings to Frank Lloyd Wright and said, "What do you think of these? Can you give me some feedback?" And Frank Lloyd Wright wrote back and gave him a bunch of feedback. And you're like, how cool is that? That for no, wasn't like they didn't know each other. It just kind of one architect to another, like, hey, here's what I think, and you're onto something here. So, I hope that sometimes, you could say commerce gets in the way of some of those kinds of relationships where it's not like I can't really show you a bunch of client work and get your feedback on it, but it would be wonderful if we could operate in that way to some degree, to push each other as a collective. But, I think also the other interesting thing is that one of, I think, the interesting developments I find in the last 5 years, there's so many designers who are starting brands. And so how does that change things? Like this watch brand, MHD, blanking on his name, but he's a designer for Morgan, the car company. He started a watch brand. And I know 3 or 4 designers who have started watch brands. And of course, like if it's your brand, you can do things like that, right?
Yeah, well, that you can look all over the world where designers are starting businesses, and I think it's great that people have the wherewithal to establish a business and grow a business. There's nothing easy about it, and the access to the market is much easier today because you can be in the garage and you can be on the web, and,
right, it's true.
And so the distribution system has changed for everybody, which
Yeah,
you can ride on Amazon's coattails somewhere.
Exactly. You can contract out your manufacturing and your distribution.
Mm. Yeah. And I think there's a power to the democracy of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The need to brand and be brand experts in this world, to differentiate, I think is a result of direct result of having to stand out in the marketplace. So if you're a designer, it's a pretty good strategy to get some of that understanding under your belt.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said we've become, instead of a T-shaped designer, which is strong in broad skills and then deep in one category, where it's sort of this multi-T where you have to be deep in a lot of categories, because that's where the world has become more disparate. We're doing a lot of different things, and so that means the designer's training and skill sets have to grow.
I think that directly applies to you now, right? As chief design officer of a company where you're overseeing industrial design, product development, as well as marketing. Is that right?
Yeah. It's in some ways it allows me to look more broadly at the whole business, and to be part of a team of people who are also trying to grow a business. So that's a lot of fun. And when the business is built around some really strong values, and sustainability is at the core of that for us as a manufacturer, it checks a lot of boxes for me. And there's something wonderful about being able to see something through a factory process and then out into the market, and to see and touch all the ways that came to be. If you're successful, it's great. If you're not successful, something didn't go quite right in the equation. So, but it's fun, and I enjoy. It kind of goes back to teaching in many ways. I think to be a good manager today is to be a good teacher, and to not hold too tightly to your turf, but to say, especially because I'm working with a lot of people who are younger than I am and who have their careers ahead of them, and I'm looking more backwards than I am forwards in many ways to help them. And I think my spirit of dominating a lot, which I tried too hard to do earlier in my career, to control everything around me, I've become much less. The ownership doesn't have to be all mine, but the end result has to be. It has to go through the needle with a really fine thread. Otherwise, there's no reason to put all that sweat into it. So if the result isn't good, then I really hold myself accountable for that.
I think that's I certainly went through that where 10 years ago I was just everything had to be just so, and then when I was at Sound United and I grew a team, I learned quickly that I had to stop managing, stop telling people what to do, and start leading, start teaching them how to do it. Otherwise, one, I would go crazy, gotta kill myself, and two, I couldn't be as objective as I could be as if I was coaching everybody, and then I could raise the bar to the standard, coach to a zone versus telling them exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And then now it's been interesting now being a consultant and trying to help clients figure out how to do that with me, basically. I'm trying to teach them so that we can have the freedom to do what we need to do. So that's been interesting. What would you, when you took on, or when you went to Watson, did they have kind of a design ethic, or is that something that you cultivated and brought there?
Well, this is my second go round at Watson, so the first time I was there, they didn't have much of a design perspective, with the exception that they would go to Orgatec, the German furniture fair, and the owner of the company, who's got a great eye for design and is a very smart gentleman, he was very inspired by the German design work he saw, and began to go down that road. But the portfolio was a bit of a hodgepodge, and there were a lot of things that were not marrying up very well. So to set a process in place to just bring a discipline around design was important, and then to decide what were the attributes that the company would build around, what was the compass. And as we got in deeper into products, we would focus on super green, super simple, and super cool. And cool not being what we thought was cool, though we think frequently some things we do are cool, but the idea that cool is an intellectual rigor into the product. So we would ask questions about, we'd talk to people about it, we would ask questions of ourselves, and we would try to, what Watson's very good about doing is prototyping early on and making things. And in the making process, we're often in a moment of discovery. So we can, just by bending pieces of cardboard, something appears that we didn't think of. And I'd love to think that we were so disciplined that we could write it all down and say, we shall go down this road and thus it shall be like this. But really it's more a process of the iterative process of creativity, right? You start here, and you may end up a little further left field or right field than you intended, but by exploring that spectrum, you get to ask a lot of questions of yourselves and kind of kick the tires. And I think that's, I don't know anybody who's got the pure A to Z kind of process. Creativity is too creative to be held to something that is a hard-edged mold, because every time we're in there, we want to break it. So I think that's the challenge for designers in industry, where you work with people who are financial wizards or sales leaders, and they want to go, and no, you can't spend this, and no, you can't do that, and it's a lot of roadblocks start getting set up. So getting people comfortable with the ambiguity of design and living in the fog for a while, and giving a spectrum of permission to let designers go search something out and then come back, and design engineers to go trial something in a prototype or a hard tool or a soft tool is important, because it's how you learn. And once you have a team that's worked well together for a while too, then I think you really you start to grow the design muscle of the business and the brand, and if people are leaving all the time, then it's hard to hold that together. You need some glue and some cohesiveness so that you can really begin to curate and exercise what the belief system is, and exert that on product and on messaging and on brand and everything.
Yeah, I think I think because of those business systems we're in, we often pitch design as this very linear thing, right? Where it's like, oh, we're going to do some research, and we're going to do some concepts, and we're going to prototype, and we're going to revise a little bit, and then we're going to go to production. And in reality, I think it's probably the most organized it could probably be is something more like this, where it's like, yeah, we're gonna start here. This might be hobby research, and this might be all sketching and prototype, and it's like we're gonna spiral in and get closer to the answer. But how direct this spiral is, it's a little hard to tell at the beginning.
It is hard, and I think it's hard to explain to. I mean, designers famously put, here's stages 0 to 5 down on and I've seen charts galore of, here's our process as a linear process, here's our process as a four square, here's our process as a circle. The double diamond to me makes some sense as a process, simply to explain to people that we start with a point, we go out, and then we come back, and we go out again, we come back, and that to me is sort of getting business owners around that process because everybody wants a framework and a dashboard and things that feel concrete, even though you're not in a concrete world. I think that's a good lesson to learn in business.
So as you went back to Watson and you took on marketing and product development, what were some of the learnings that maybe you didn't expect?
Well, I was really lucky to have a great team already in place, so that would help with my level of work that I was trying to do. The projects were in fits and starts, so that was also kind of weeding out where things were on the spectrum, and really there was one big project that was getting hung up. And it was easy for me to come in and be super critical at that moment about where things had stalled and kind of drop a bomb on it and blow it up and see if we could put it back together again in a different way. But it wasn't necessarily easy for the team to accept that. And it wasn't easy for me to try and navigate through that. The company's grown up since I left too, which is nice. It's changed culturally, and it's become a more, I think it's a very sustainable business. There weren't, even when I was there, it wasn't ever on, it's always been an extremely well-managed company. But in manufacturing, you're always at the whims of the market, and you're also at the whims of the economy.
Yeah.
So the retention of cash in a business is something I've learned to greatly respect, because this business owner is always ready for that rainy day. And when 2008 came around, we actually went out and bought a distressed company, and so we could bring jobs back into our business.
Interesting.
And hold on to jobs, because the manifesto of this company is it's about the dignity of the working man and woman, and it's a continuation strategy, not an exit strategy. So the goal is to build and grow jobs in the Washington community that we're a part of.
That's so refreshing.
It is a very refreshing, and it permeates everything that we do, and why I think the company has now been able to kind of retrench itself and grow a new group of people who have been there long enough that they're living the culture, and I think that really helps with the shifts that are needed for the company to continue to grow. There's at least in the furniture manufacturing world, there's sort of spectrums of growth that happen, and when you get to be a $25 million company, you can expect this type of structure around you, and then you get to double that, and you can expect to need this type of structure, and then you get to the next 25, and it's sort of in those chunks I see these businesses growing, and with each of those thresholds there's a need to both increase process but not have it strangle people, and then increase communication and not have it become more siloed, and increase participation and opportunity for people in the company so they don't get stratified or capped out at some level. And so that to me is also part of the interesting part of just growing a business, is really to find the layers that you have to create to be a great company. And we've actually taken a group of, I say we, but it was the owner's idea. There's been a class developed for the company internally that has brought the sort of next generation of leaders into this class, and they've been able to speak with the business owner, who happens to be quite a poet in terms of his belief system. So you can hear his words and everything that we say. And then there was a library of books that everyone had to read. So whether it was from good to great, Jim Collins, all the way out to extreme ownership, which is based on some military principles. And then Chouinard's Let My People Go Surfing.
Yeah.
There was sort of a swath of books that everybody had to read, and there was a trainer who was bringing the class through it. And as leaders, we also participated in that, and it's been a really interesting and good growth for the company to invest in that type of sort of shared program.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a bench, right? Like, there has to be the next generation, and it's really awesome to hear of that business as a continuation strategy. I mean, it's so common to hear leaders talk about the exit strategy for their company, and I don't think Henry Ford or Steve Jobs had an exit strategy. I think I think their goal was to try to build something and to continue to build it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that is a trend. If we'll see this trend come back to growing businesses in a more sustainable fashion, so that because that's kind of what we need.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's really, I wish I had a better crystal ball. I think there's so many opportunities, but also just enormous challenges right now. If, as a nation, I think if we were to truly invest in a green economy and get ahead of the state of the planet in some way, at least just to make more overt exercises in that way. If we were to grow a transportation system that wasn't reliant on fossil fuels, and if we could have a New Deal or a works project that would give people who are caught in the threshold between yesterday and tomorrow, there's no reason why we should be plowing coal out of the ground in this day and age when we know it's causing terrible problems with air pollution, and we're ripping the earth apart. To me, design also is at a point where it has to face the ethical and moral judgments of what we've done as designers to help create microplastics that are everywhere. What we've done as designers to participate in that industrial world, and we don't need to beat ourselves up over it too much, because that doesn't really affect change. But I think being proactive and being aware of the societal impact of these shifts, these really huge sort of seismic shifts that are happening, designers can lend a hand there, and be politically active or socially active in their communities. So I think there's opportunity for design that's just enormous, but we're going to have to keep changing the chameleon skin that we have to stay in that positive race.
And I think it's an extension of what we talked about, kind of using creative thinking and creative problem solving, and we could say we've gone from designing individual things, which is still important and a value, to using design as an organizing principle, like you said, coming into Watson, having these individual items and being like, okay, what are we doing? What are we about? How do we create a collection? To then extending that to a larger kind of problem solving that in some ways has happened in the past, right? You think of during the New Deal era, where they made the Tennessee Valley Water and Power Authority, right? Where there's a whole whole swath of the country that still didn't have electricity in the 40s, and they made a decision to create hydroelectric power in this whole giant region, and that's a level of impact that only a huge organization like the government can have. But I think there is a role for design to play in that. How did that? So you had mentioned this is kind of your second tour at Watson. In between, for those that don't know, you left and was head of the design department at Oregon College of Arts and Crafts. What was that? Was that like a resetting moment for you for a couple of years? Like, tell me about that, how that affected you.
Well, when I left Watson, I took some time off. I was feeling burnt out again. I sort of pile drive myself in work, and then I need to reset. And I think sometimes just getting perspective on life and going through all the things that life throws at you, whether it's family care or other things, I needed to just step back and kind of let the wind blow through between my ears. And I actually went to Southern California and was just absorbing culture and art. And I taught briefly in LA, and then decided that I was missing the Northwest, and the climate wasn't quite right for me. So I started looking around, and the Oregon College of Art and Craft was starting an MFA in industrial design, and it was a crafts college, and art and craft college. It really had the students who were doing objects from a craft perspective. It would be a vessel as a teapot, and they were or a toolbox for personal tools, but it wasn't necessarily production level work or in a series, nor was it responding to different questions. And so I came up and I spoke to them. I fell in love with Portland. It was a pretty easy pull of the trigger for me. And it got me close enough to mountains and ocean that I was, and colder weather, that I was feeling more my kinship here. And the program started. It was very small, and unfortunately the college was having some financial difficulties, which I really wasn't aware of, but I could sense that a small arts and crafts college in this day and age was going to be struggling with enrollment. But my job was to develop the program, and it was a 2-year program, and get students in and go out and recruit. And then I evaluated all, as I often do. I did all my research and looked at all the programs in the country and tried to thread the needle of where this program would fit, because it wasn't going to be the traditional program. It was bringing students from sort of different disciplines into design. So there was a fair amount of poetry in the program, I will say, that was different. And
which I think is appropriate at the master's level. I think that's there for us to ask those questions and provoke, like you said earlier.
It does. It was that for me, and I think it was that for the students who came from engineering, anthropology, art backgrounds. So as I was doing that, then in the background I was hearing noise about the college's problems. So I just really tried to make sure that my students could get through as much of the coursework as possible. And then unfortunately we began to transition students out within about 1.5 years of my being there. So it was a very short-lived experience. But not unlike things that I had witnessed in my design career with studios or businesses that have kind of, unfortunately this was 106-year-old college, but
beautiful campus.
Beautiful campus and great facilities. And what was fun for me was in getting up to speed on the program, I actually put myself through their summer classes
Oh, cool.
before I started teaching. One, I'd never been a full-time academic person, so I didn't really know what was really needed. And then I wanted to experience what it was like, so I did spoon carving and ceramics,
Yeah.
and I've always loved working on the potter's wheel, so that was sort of a natural for me. But I was also going to bring this digital equation across the pond to them, and they had a small fabrication lab. And I thought the program should be at this nexus of the artifact and then the digital. So moving that and examining what it meant to have an artisan hand on a highly produced product. What would we discover there? And then very deep study of materials and how materials communicate and their sort of the sensorial quality that materials communicate, but also the sustainability. We went to Denton Plastics here in Portland, one of the largest, I think they are the largest recycler west of the Mississippi. And it was a discovery of we're all happy recyclers because we think it's all going somewhere, but point of fact, what they get to recycle is one very small fraction of what we all throw away.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an eye-opener for the students. And so we started to look at the really sustainability and the monstrous hybrids that happen in the compilation of a package. So a potato chip bag that has layers of film
Right. Yeah.
and graphics and foil to preserve and protect freshness, but it's very difficult to recycle. So we went through a lot of the businesses here in Portland that are built around sustainability, whether it's Cycle Dog or Looped Works. These are companies that are building from the upcycling of materials to companies that are trying not to pollute. So looking at zero waste companies. So that's where I was beginning to take the program, but unfortunately it just ran out of time and money.
It does. It does. Maybe in hindsight, but it seems very related to what you're doing at Watson in some ways. With the sustainable brand. Not directly with upcycling and things like that, but it seems like some of it is applicable.
Well, it is. There's certainly that's something that I think for me, the work around greening materials and being more thoughtful about what I do, either personally as a designer or professionally in a business like Watson, that's important.
So what would you, just thinking about some of our audience here for Course 77, I'm sure it's a lot of younger designers, maybe some mid-level designers. What advice might you have for some of those designers who maybe have ambitions to go on and go into design leadership and be a VP of design, a chief design officer? What advice would you give yourself, your younger self, along those lines?
I think staying true to yourself and what you believe in, and not to be too swayed by other people's opinions if they take you off course of what you believe in. I think there's a hunger when you're young, starting out, to try just to get a job.
Yeah.
But sometimes waiting and picking the right path is important. So finding somebody who can give you some guidance and mentorship early on, talking to professionals is really a great idea. Showing your work. It takes a long time to build a portfolio. And so if you are starting out and you get opportunities that give you professional visibility, great. But a lot of people are working under a senior designer or a design director, and in those experiences it's important to be a good collaborator and try and study design. And as much as we live in the here and now, I think there's so many great lessons in design to look back upon. So cracking a book on who have been some really good designers in the past, because the building blocks are all there, and their work very often can inspire us. And then really exploring materials. I think that's the opportunity space for designers more and more, is just how to manipulate organic materials, how to make the inorganic meaningful, read cradle to cradle, and understand that they're biological nutrients and technical nutrients, and those have to be separated at some point so that they can live in their circles of recyclability, upcyclability, or life cycle. And then try and do no harm. And I mean that from a point of view of no harm to another human being, no harm to the planet, and no harm to your career. So if you've been in a team and you've had a bum assignment, or you've had a terrible boss, or you feel mistreated, don't wear it on your sleeve. Learn from those mistakes, but also learn that you should walk out to the forest and scream your heart out if it's that bad. But don't burn bridges, because the community is small, and designers are living in the same sort of swirl as everybody else, and we have to treat each other with dignity and respect. So I think that's probably what I would recommend.
That's a lot of good advice. I mean, your point about kind of learning architectural history and reading some books, it made me think of this old saying that a tree with no roots is easily blown over. And I'm just a nerd, so I really love reading about art and design, and I feel like that's kind of like my root system, and reading about philosophy and having a point of view helps you not get blown over in those windstorms, because it's turbulent out there, and you're going to be challenged to do it, better, faster, cheaper, cut corners, and you have to have integrity, because at the end of the day, our reputation is our biggest piece, and if you have a reputation for cutting corners or hurting people in your path, it's going to get around pretty quick.
Yeah, I think there's design is a full-time life, right? It doesn't stop at 5 o'clock and pick up at 8. It's what you go home to and what you carry with you. And when you walk down the street and you see something, you take a picture of it, and it's inspiring. Or you see people using things that weren't intended to be used that way, and you go, oh, that's an aha moment. And those aha moments are where all the discovery happens. So I also would say, just stay observant in your life, and stay curious, so that you're sensitive. I think designers have great antenna, and the sharper your reception is, the better and longer your career can be.
Last question before I let you go. So you've had this wonderful path throughout your career. Where are you in 10 years, do you think?
I don't think I'll stop.
Yeah.
I just don't see any reason to. When I look at the people who are ahead of me on that curve, they're not stopping. And so it's, the media might call it encore acts or anything else, but I think, to me, it's just a continuum of life. And the creative life, when I think of Eva Zeisel or Antoine Prudhomme or any of these, sort of legendary ladies, Zaha Hadid, if she had lived longer, I mean, she was just hitting her stride, and she was 60-something.
Right.
And
sure.
the Chinese airport that just opened up that looks like an octopus, I don't know what the name of it is, but it's sort of this, her language was so strong that her firm and her partner have been able to carry forward that aesthetic, which is really, just intense, super, super intense. So I just think it's too much fun to stop until they have to put you in old Sparky and off you go.
Yeah, I remember when I did that summer in Milan, we went to tour the Sages factory where they were making a lot of chairs, and the owner of Sages was like, oh, one of designers that we collaborate with is very close by. Why don't you go visit him after this? And so we went to go visit him, and we just pulled up to this lovely country Italian estate, and he was, yeah, I'll come in, you know, I have some interns working on a prototype, and they're just building a chair prototype on his kitchen table, and he was probably in his late 60s,
Yeah.
and he's just, you know, doing some contract furniture work, and I wish I knew, I don't remember his name, but I just, you know, I was 20 years old when I saw that, and I was like, that to me seems pretty cool. He's just at home with some interns doing work.
Yeah.
And yeah, why would you stop?
No, I don't know. It's, you know, I think of Success, and I know that he was designing right up until the end, and you know, had his retrospective after retrospective, and was just enormously creative. So, you know, the prolific nature of people like that just are very inspiring. And sometimes you just have to say, you know, if somebody else can do it, why not?
Well, thanks for your time today. I've so much enjoyed talking to you, as always. And
thank you. It was fun.
yeah, look forward to our next coffee chat.
Okay.